Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters.
To bring you some sad news, legendary newswoman, friend, and colleague to so many here, Barbara Walters has died at the age of 93. She died peacefully at her home earlier this evening.
Barbara Walters spent her entire career exposing everyone else's secrets. Presidents, Hollywood legends, billionaires. Even the world's most powerful leaders couldn't escape her questions. But there was one secret she protected more fiercely than any story she ever broke. It was so explosive that, if it had come out at the wrong time, it could have ended everything she had built. Now, years later, hidden details have resurfaced, raising new questions about the woman who always seemed to know everyone else's business. What was Barbara Walters so desperate to keep buried? This is the scandal Barbara Walters took extraordinary lengths to hide, and the secret that almost brought one of America's most trusted journalists crashing down. The painful truth behind her perfect childhood. Barbara Jill Walters was born on September 25, 1929 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a family that seemed to exist at the intersection of glamour and uncertainty. She was the daughter of Dina Seletsky and Lou Walters, an ambitious nightclub owner whose life exposed Barbara to extraordinary privilege while also teaching her painful lessons about success, failure, and resilience. Long before Barbara Walters became one of the most recognized journalists in the world, she was simply a quiet young girl watching the entertainment industry from a unique vantage point that very few children ever experienced. Even the Walters family name carried a story of reinvention. Lou Walters' own father had changed the family's original Polish surname to Warmwater during an earlier journey through London on the way to New York, reflecting the desire of many immigrant families at the time to build a new identity in America. That willingness to reshape one's future would become a recurring theme throughout the Walters family's history, although Barbara herself later chose to establish her reputation through determination rather than reinvention. Lou Walters eventually built the celebrated Latin Quarter nightclub, first in Boston and later in a far more glamorous New York location. The nightclub quickly became one of the country's premier entertainment venues, attracting celebrities, musicians, comedians, dancers, and some of the biggest performers of the era. As his business empire expanded, Lou added Broadway productions and a Las Vegas entertainment operation, transforming himself into one of the most influential figures in American nightlife. To the outside world, it appeared that the Walters family had everything anyone could dream of. They lived among famous people, enjoyed financial success, and occupied a place at the center of American entertainment during one of its most exciting periods. For Barbara, however, growing up in that world was a very different experience than many might imagine. While glamour surrounded her from an early age, she was never the center of attention. Night after night, she found herself sitting quietly in the same shadowed corner reserved for the owner's daughter, watching performers prepare for their moment under the spotlight. Rather than participating in the glamorous lifestyle, she observed it from a distance. That unique perspective gave her something far more valuable than celebrity status. It taught her how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. From that quiet corner, Barbara witnessed the reality that audiences never saw. She watched exhausted dancers step off stage with bloodied feet after dazzling performances that appeared effortless. She saw famous comedians trembling with anxiety before delivering jokes that would leave entire rooms laughing moments later. She observed entertainers removing the confident masks they wore on stage and revealing the ordinary fears and vulnerabilities hidden underneath. Those experiences left a lasting impression. Barbara came to understand at an unusually young age that fame, confidence, and power were often carefully constructed performances masking the same insecurities experienced by everyone else. Decades later, that insight would become one of the defining characteristics of her interviewing style. She knew instinctively that every public figure, no matter how powerful, possessed a private side waiting to be uncovered. Yet, behind the glamour, the Walters household also carried profound personal tragedy. Barbara's older brother, Burton, died of pneumonia when he was only 14 months old, a heartbreaking loss that deeply affected the family. The tragedy left an emotional absence that could never truly be filled and remained part of the family's private history for years afterward. Her older sister, Jacqueline, faced a different lifelong challenge. Living with an intellectual disability, Jacqueline required constant care and support throughout her life. The responsibility extended to the entire family, shaping daily routines and placing emotional as well as practical demands on everyone in the household. Barbara would later speak about the deep sense of responsibility she felt toward her sister, a commitment that remained with her long after she achieved professional success. As if those personal burdens were not enough, the family's financial security eventually collapsed with stunning speed. Despite years of remarkable success, the Latin Quarter empire crumbled under crushing debt. Almost overnight, the luxurious lifestyle disappeared. The family lost their penthouse, their car, and nearly everything else they had accumulated during Lou Walters' years of prosperity. The dramatic reversal was devastating, not only financially, but emotionally as well. Lou Walters suffered a severe breakdown in the aftermath, leaving Barbara to witness firsthand how quickly success could vanish. Watching her father lose everything he had spent years building left an indelible mark on Barbara Walters. The experience instilled in her a deep fear of financial insecurity and taught her that success could never be taken for granted. That fear of poverty, born from seeing her family's fortunes collapse almost overnight, became one of the driving forces behind her extraordinary work ethic. They tried to silence her from day one. Television in the 1950s offered almost no real path forward for a woman with serious ambitions. Newsrooms were overwhelmingly controlled by men, and women were generally expected to occupy supporting roles rather than positions of authority. It was an industry where female talent was often judged more by appearance than journalistic ability, making it extraordinarily difficult for anyone hoping to build a serious reporting career. Barbara Walters entered this environment knowing that the opportunities available to her were limited, yet she remained determined to find a way forward. Like many women of her generation, Walters began her career almost entirely behind the scenes rather than in front of the camera. Her earliest responsibilities involved writing press releases, a role that allowed her to sharpen her writing skills while learning how television productions operated. Although the work received little public recognition, it provided valuable experience and exposed her to the mechanics of broadcasting at a time when simply getting into the industry represented a significant achievement. Her responsibilities eventually expanded when she became a producer for a children's television program called Ask the Camera. The show was directed by a young producer named Roone Arledge, a figure who would later become one of the most influential executives in American television. Years later, Arledge would go on to lead ABC News, placing him in a position that would profoundly shape Barbara Walters' career from an entirely different role. At the time, however, neither could have known how closely their professional paths would become connected in the decades ahead. Not every early opportunity ended positively. One producing position came to an abrupt conclusion after her boss began aggressively pushing toward marriage. The situation became even more volatile when he physically fought another man Walters actually cared about. The confrontation ultimately forced her out of the job altogether, bringing an unexpected end to another stage of her early career. It was yet another reminder that, for women in television during that era, professional advancement could easily become entangled with unwanted personal complications. After spending years writing for CBS and for Redbook magazine, Walters finally joined The Today Show in 1961 as a writer and researcher. Although the position kept her behind the scenes initially, it offered an opportunity to demonstrate her ability within one of the nation's most influential morning programs. Through persistence and consistently reliable work, she gradually earned enough trust to begin appearing on camera. Even then, however, the opportunities remained carefully restricted. Rather than being recognized as a journalist, Walters appeared under the dismissive title of Today Girl, a role largely reserved for fashion features, light lifestyle segments, and weather reports rather than hard news. The title itself reflected the limited expectations placed upon women in television journalism at the time. Despite proving her abilities repeatedly, she still found herself excluded from the kind of reporting and interviewing assignments routinely given to her male colleagues. Even her own voice became the subject of public ridicule. Walters' distinctive speech pattern, particularly the way she pronounced certain consonants, attracted widespread attention after comedian Gilda Radner created the recurring Saturday Night Live character Baba Wawa, a parody based on Walters' speaking style. The impression became one of the show's most recognizable recurring sketches and followed Walters for years. Although millions of viewers laughed at the impersonation, it also became an additional obstacle as she continued fighting to be taken seriously inside television newsrooms where credibility already had to be earned under far more difficult circumstances than those faced by many of her male counterparts. In 1971, Walters began hosting a morning program called Not for Women Only, alongside Frank McGee. Although they shared the broadcast, the balance of authority remained noticeably unequal. McGee reportedly refused to participate in any joint interview unless he was guaranteed the first 3 questions every single time. It was a seemingly small demand, yet it served as a constant reminder of how reluctant many established male broadcasters were to share professional authority with a woman sitting beside them on the same set. Only after McGee's death in 1974 did NBC finally appoint Barbara Walters as the first female co-host of an American television news program. The milestone represented far more than a promotion. It marked the breaking of a barrier she had spent nearly 2 decades quietly pushing against through persistence, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to proving that she belonged in serious journalism. Just 2 years later, in 1976, ABC signed Walters to a 5-year, $5 million contract, instantly making her the highest-paid news anchor in television, regardless of gender. She joined veteran journalist Harry Reasoner as co-anchor of the ABC Evening News, creating one of the most closely watched partnerships in broadcast journalism. Popular retellings often describe the relationship as one defined by personal hostility, but a fuller picture suggests that much of the tension stemmed from Reasoner's resistance to the co-anchor format itself, rather than any specific dislike of Walters personally. How Barbara Walters became the most feared interviewer in America. Rather than accept permanent exile from serious news, Walters built an entirely new kind of program around herself instead, joining ABC's news magazine program 2020 in 1979 before becoming its official co-anchor in 1984. That same platform let her apply the exact lesson learned decades earlier backstage at the Latin Quarter, stripping away the practiced masks of the famous and powerful through deeply personal, often uncomfortably direct questions. In November of 1977, Walters secured the first joint interview with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin during genuinely tense peace treaty negotiations, a scoop so impressive that rival broadcaster Walter Cronkite reportedly asked his own team afterward whether Walters had managed to get something they had somehow missed. That same year, she traveled to Cuba for a tense 2-day interview with Fidel Castro, directly challenging him on camera about his own government's total intolerance of dissent. A now legendary conversation with Katharine Hepburn produced the famous question about which kind of tree Hepburn would want to be. Hepburn answering an oak, specifically because oaks stay strong and resist real damage. On March 3, 1999, an emotional sit-down with Monica Lewinsky drew 74 million viewers, still one of the largest audiences ever recorded for a single news broadcast. That same fearless style, however, carried a much sharper, more uncomfortable edge as well. Actor John Goodman faced blunt questions about his weight on camera. Singer Bette Midler faced repeated, pointed questions about her own appearance during a live interview. Pop star Ricky Martin pressed publicly about his sexuality years before he was personally ready to discuss it, later admitted the moment left him feeling genuinely violated, something Walters herself eventually acknowledged, regretting years afterward. The very same fearlessness that toppled world leaders on camera could just as easily turn deeply personal and, at times, genuinely painful for the person sitting across from her. Marriage happened 4 separate times across 3 different men, and every single one ended in real heartbreak. Robert Katz came first in 1955, an annulment following within about 11 months. Theater producer Lee Goober came next in 1963, a marriage that lasted until 1976, and included adopting a daughter named Jacqueline after several devastating miscarriages along the way. Television executive Merv Adelson followed after that, married in 1981, divorced in 1984, remarried in 1986, and divorced again for good in 1992. Long before any of those marriages, a college-era relationship with a young, controversial attorney named Roy Cohn had already grown into a lifelong friendship. Cohn later helping arrange the legal adoption of her daughter, and separately helping her own father work through serious financial and legal trouble connected to the collapse of his nightclub empire. A relationship with future Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan followed during the 1970s, and a romantic connection with Senator John Warner developed later still, during the 1990s. None of those relationships, however, carried anywhere near the same risk as one particular romance kept almost entirely hidden from public knowledge for more than 30 full years. The scandal she spent 30 years hiding. During the 1970s, Walters carried on a real relationship with Edward Brooke, a Republican senator from Massachusetts and the first African-American ever popularly elected to the United States Senate. Brooke was married at the time, and the relationship reportedly continued for several years, conducted almost entirely away from any public visibility whatsoever. Both Walters and Brooke apparently understood exactly what public exposure would mean: an instant, career-ending scandal on both sides at once, given the enormous political and media weight each of them individually carried. A close friend eventually delivered a serious, direct warning, cautioning that continuing the relationship risked real disaster, right as Brooke prepared for an especially difficult re-election campaign the following year. The relationship ended quietly, not long after that warning arrived. What makes this particular secret so remarkable, given how many hidden political and celebrity relationships eventually leak out one way or another, is that this one stayed completely buried from public knowledge for more than 3 full decades afterward, hidden behind one of the most scrutinized public faces in all of American television. In 2008, Walters finally revealed the Brooke relationship publicly for the very first time inside her memoir, Audition, followed by a widely watched appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show, describing the relationship in fairly restrained, careful terms. For most retellings of this story, that single memoir reveal has always marked the natural endpoint. The secret finally out. The story finally complete. Here is the part almost no earlier retelling has had the chance to properly cover yet. In June of 2025, years after Walters herself had already passed away, a documentary titled Barbara Walters, Tell Me Everything premiered at the Tribeca Festival before streaming on Hulu. Built from previously unaired archival interview footage recorded across decades of her own career. Inside that same footage, Walters reflects once more on the Brooke relationship directly in her own voice, describing plainly how different that particular era truly was, and explaining that a relationship like that simply had to stay secret, no matter the personal cost involved. A rare posthumous piece of testimony straight from Walters herself on the exact question so many people had already spent decades wondering about. That same documentary reportedly went further still, gathering commentary from people who actually knew her personally, including Oprah Winfrey, longtime colleague Cynthia McFadden, and former Disney chief executive Bob Iger, several of them reportedly weighing in with obvious discomfort on how Walters handled her romantic life across the decades, Cohn and Brooke both included. One particularly sharp detail surfaced inside that same film as well, a story about legendary anchor Peter Jennings displaying an old-fashioned, dismissive attitude toward women in the newsroom, a small but telling reminder that the resistance Walters spent her whole career fighting against was never confined to just Frank McGee or Harry Reasoner alone. That single documentary adds a genuinely new layer onto a story most people assumed had already been fully told back in 2008. Proof that even a secret revealed once can still carry new weight, when the person who lived it gets one final chance to describe it entirely in her own words. A legacy no scandal could erase. Long after the network anchor chair, Walters proved she still had real reinvention left in her, co-founding the daytime talk show The View in 1997, alongside longtime producing partner Bill Geddy, building an entire format around women from different generations, debating the biggest issues of the day at one single round table. The show ran successfully for years and earned multiple daytime Emmy wins along the way, cementing an already historic career even further. Health struggles eventually became public too, including open-heart surgery in 2010 to repair a failing valve, before Walters officially stepped back from The View in 2014 after decades spent breaking down barrier after barrier across television news. She passed away at home in Manhattan on December 30th, 2022, at 93 years old, having quietly faced real memory struggles during those final private years away from any camera at all. Her final words, later carved into a gravestone in Florida beside her family, stated simply that she carried no regrets and had lived a wonderful life. A fitting close for a woman who spent an entire career asking everyone else the hardest possible questions while quietly carrying one enormous, carefully guarded question of her own. That secret relationship could have ended 2 careers in an instant, yet it somehow stayed hidden for more than 30 years, only to resurface in her own actual voice years after she was already gone. Barbara Walters spent a lifetime uncovering other people's biggest secrets, yet her own remained hidden for more than 3 decades. Even today, her story continues to spark debate about love, ambition, and the price of protecting a reputation. What do you think? Was keeping that secret the right decision? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold stories behind history's biggest names.